Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Curtis. I am so excited about my conversation today with composer, musician, producer, and all around amazing dude, Robert Holmes. Robert and I had a chance to sit down and over Zoom and have a conversation about a week and a half ago, and I will be playing that for you in a little bit. I see Robert is in the chat right now. That's so awesome. I'll be in the chat as well, so we can all sort of talk during our pre-recorded interview. When the interview is over, Robert will join us live, and we will do a live Q&A for those of you who are still around. So super exciting. I got to just say that when we finished the first round of like the Phantasmagoria 2 oral history, and we started thinking about reaching out to people from other games of that era, the one person that came up the most from my Patreon members on the Discord channel was, you got to get Robert Holmes. And so I reached out to him via his, I didn't know how to get a hold of him, so I found his website, and there was a little contact thing where you have to put your name in and all that. And I did that thinking, that's not going to work. And I immediately got a response from him saying that he'd love to talk with me. He's been so gracious, and our conversation was just that. We had just a great conversation, and I look forward to sharing that with you in just a couple minutes. But in the meantime, I want to give you guys a couple announcements, because there's a lot going on in Conversations with Curtis land, and I thought you might want to know about that. So first of all, if you don't know already, I am starting tomorrow at noon, now 12:30 Pacific time. We are beginning a lunchtime horror playthrough where Victoria Morsel Hemmingson and I, Victoria being the actress who played Adrian in Phantasmagoria 2, she and I are going to begin a playthrough of Phantasmagoria. Actually, not two, but one. And I don't know. I think this might be. I don't think anybody's ever done this before. This seems. I feel like we are breaking new ground. This is two protagonists, the actors of two very big budget horror games of the 1990s, getting together for the very first time to play a game. It's super exciting. We did play a little bit during our interview back in December. And so I just posted on our YouTube channel a little intro talking about our upcoming series of playthroughs. And I attached that first 15 minutes of us playing. So that'll kind of act as part one. And when Tori and I start playing tomorrow, we'll pick up where we left off. So check out that YouTube video if you want to get caught up on everything. And we'll be doing this every Monday at lunchtime between probably around 12:30 every Monday for the foreseeable future. If we have to take a Monday or two off because of scheduling, we will. But for the most part, it will be on Mondays, and we'll just play this game. Two actors who do not play games playing a game that she was in. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun. What else? Oh man, I'm still trying to figure. I don't think I'll ever fully figure out OBS, but I'm getting better. Our next announcement, a week from today, I am going to have another live stream interview. We're going to actually go back to Phantasmagoria 2 for a brief moment, because I have wanted for a long time now to speak with the actor who played Bob Arnold. His name is Donald Berg, and Don and I finally got together. It took a while getting a hold of him and getting him to agree. In fact, when I first reached out to Don, he was not very enthusiastic. In fact, it was a little unsettling. He sent me a message that I guess I'm going to share this with you right now, but it was very weird and not, and somewhat in character. So check out what Don's response was when I said to him, "Would you like to be on my show?"
Oh, piss off, Conversations with Curtis.
Yeah. So So, it didn't start off well, but we also sat down a week or so ago and had our conversation. And oh my gosh, he is hilarious. We had such a great talk, and he is funny, and he has some amazing memories about making Phantaz 2. And we will be sharing that next Sunday I think it's Sunday, April 3rd. Here, let me put it down here. It's going to be April 2nd. So I think it's going to be, Sunday, April. I don't know when it's going to be. It's going to be, I'll let you know. I think it's next Saturday, the 2nd. And this is going to be a Patreon only event, a live stream event. This is my way of rewarding some of my Patreon members for their support and trying to entice other Patreon members to come join. So if you want to join us live and watch Don and my conversation, and then get a chance to do a live Q&A with him afterwards, that will be happening next weekend. And again, I think it's Saturday at 10 a.m. But we'll post it on social media. Speaking of social media, we just got to our 2,000th subscriber on YouTube. So that's awesome. We're starting to grow here. It's pretty neat to see how we're starting to pick up more and more steam, and this is just an opportunity for me to thank all of you for joining me and for supporting in the way that you can. I do want to just very quickly thank all of my Patreon members for all of their support, because I truly couldn't do this without them. If you're one of them and you're watching right now, thank you so much. If you are not a Patreon member, but you are in a position to do so, to contribute, I would love your support. We really think that we are just the tip of the iceberg of the people that might want to enjoy this content. And we're just trying to make sure we can get the word out. And if we can get some more revenue so that we can hire more people to help us blow this up a little bit, that would be great. So please consider joining us on Patreon. If you can't support us on Patreon, you can do what YouTube Wanderer just did and give us a one-time donation through the Super Chat here on YouTube. You can also just hop onto PayPal or Venmo and make a donation there. That way no fees are taken out. I think with YouTube, they take a pretty big chunk for these donations. So if you're not able to join us on Patreon, and you can just throw a little bit of love our way financially, then feel free to do that on one of these sites. You'll be seeing a chat bot with all of the links popping up every 10 minutes or so. So feel free to utilize those. All right, let's see what else. One final thing before I play my conversation with Robert. Is back in September, a Twitter user that goes by Words of Magic, and his bio says that he has been localizing video games into French since 1998. Well, he came across I don't know how he came across this, but he came across 5 VHS videos of all of the movies in Phantaz 2, all the movie scenes. We don't know the quality of these tapes. He has looked at it a little bit, and it looks pretty good, but there might be some issues. And he is willing to get those tapes digitized so that we can have access to them and sort of see what it looks like. Now, it's not fair and nor is he willing to pay for that. But I think what I'm going to do in the next week or so is start a very small Kickstarter campaign, like a dinky one, like $400, so that we can pay him for his time and pay for the digitizing of these videos. And then we can take a look at these tapes and see what they're like. And who knows, this could be the very first tiny step towards a remastering of Phantasmagoria 2. So thank you, Words of Magic, for making that available, and we will we'll see if we can put some money together to make those things happen. So pretty cool. All right, that is everything. So I am excited to share with you my interview with Robert Holmes. Robert has spent many years in the Los Angeles music scene. Then he worked in the studio and post-production communities in Hollywood before joining the computer gaming giant Sierra Online. When he was there, he joined a stellar composer group. While there, Robert's work included several games, including the award-winning Gabriel Knight series. Additional notable games have included Jane Jensen's Gray Matter, Lola, Lucy's Big Adventure, Möebius, and the Gabriel Knight Sins of the Fathers 20th Anniversary Edition. He has been a producer, a writer, a member of the Brothers Four. He's worked with Sting, the Scarlet Furies. He's like Zelig. He's someone who's just been everywhere and has stories about everything. I loved my conversation with him, and I want to share it with you right now. So please enjoy. Let me see if I can get this all lined up so I don't screw it up too quickly. So please enjoy my conversation with Robert Holmes. You probably have to hit a little button to let it happen. Oh. Okay, wait a minute. I don't see. I'm not seeing any audio. Let me make sure the audio is happening. This should be it. I think we're going to be okay now. Let's take a look. Hey, Robert Holmes, welcome to Conversations with Curtis. Thank you so much for agreeing to join me today.
Absolutely, thanks.
Glad
to be here.
Oh, good. Is it Robert? Do you go by Robert?
I go by Robert. I go by Bob.
Okay, so you got to tell me. So your close friends, what do they generally call you?
You know, I still have relatives that call me Bobby. So,
so wasn't that, you have one of those names, right? Like Margaret somehow becomes Peggy. I don't know how Robert turned into Bob or Bobby. That's a fascinating one.
And you know, the problem with Bob or Robert is with either one, it's like if you're in a crowd and somebody yells, 400 guys turn around.
Yeah, I think that, your our age range, there are a lot of Bobs and Roberts. I think not quite so much anymore. I think they've gotten a little off. Well, anyways, I'm thrilled to have you here. I, as I talked to you on the phone briefly, my journey to this, whatever this is, this live stream interview series, was born out of COVID, being stuck in COVID and finding out that this game that I did years and years ago was actually celebrating its 25th anniversary. So I thought, I'll just, I got the time. People seem to be interested. There's a lot of nostalgia for these games that you created back in the day, right? And so I thought, why don't I just create like this fun oral history project? So I reached out to a lot of folks who made that game, probably folks that you worked with closely, like Lorelei Shannon and
absolutely
Andy Hoyos, Gary Spinrad, and we had a lot of fun. We spent the whole year last year, breaking down what we all remember about that game. And so it's been such a good time, and the fans who have joined me have been so enthusiastic. They don't want me to stop, so they keep pushing me to talk about other games that they love. And so you are my first real foray outside of my comfort zone, which is the Phantasm world. So, so it's been fun looking at all things Gabriel Knight, and more than anything, your music, which has been on nonstop since for the last 4 or 5 days, which is just gorgeous stuff. You're really quite something. So
thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Well, it's funny, hearing you. First of all, thank you for doing this kind of thing and helping keep the work alive, which means the world to those of us who were involved. Because certainly we had no idea we'd be talking about this stuff.
I know. I almost, I almost purposely forgot about it. It wasn't until people started reaching out to me. And even those early reach outs, I thought, I don't know what that is, but it is more important than I ever thought. And that people, and as you said, I don't think enough people are recording it or I think this is vital stuff. You guys were the forerunners of what's happening today, and it's fascinating to see.
Well, and Jane and I have always felt so fortunate that we've just always gotten great feedback and great communication from the community, all over the world. Any given week, I may get an email from Portugal, or
I know. I
and
got one
and
from
it's just
Brazil
great.
yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so cool to know that maybe you brought hopefully some pleasure to somebody's day.
I think it's more than pleasure. I think it's in many ways it helped formulate certain with you. I think people listen to that score, and it helped them understand music in ways that they may not have prior to.
Mm.
It's fascinating to me what you know the unintentional reach that we sometimes are able to get to.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, gosh, I have so much to talk to you about, but I thought I would start because we don't know each other, and I've made everybody else go through this, so I don't think it's fair to let you skip. But I've been doing this fun icebreaker where I ask everybody to tell me their entire life story with as much detail as possible. Try not to leave anything out, but the caveat is you have to do it in 3 minutes or less. So from the moment you were born to right now, give me everything: your childhood, your formative years, your professional life, the whole 9 yards, 3 minutes or less.
Okay.
You
All
let me know
right.
when you're ready, and I'm going to start the timer.
Okay, here we go.
Okay.
All right. I was born in Inglewood, California. Lived in the Valley, Woodland Hills as a small child, and then spent most of my youth in a little town called Whittier in Southern California. Got turned on to music by, my parents and older siblings who played a lot of everything from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so, from about the age of, I'd say about 10 on, when I got my first guitar, I was hooked and have loved nothing else.
Hmm.
And was very fortunate. I lived in a little town. There was something in the water in that town because a bunch of us went on to have pro musical careers. Guys who play with Paul McCartney or Burt Bacharach, or just a lot of talent in that little town, which was a great way to learn. So did a lot of bands during the 70s and 80s in Orange County and Hollywood, LA. Spent a lot of years doing studio work in LA, post-production, composing. And then at a certain point in my life, discovered the Great Northwest, moved up here, spent about 20 years living in Seattle, working in the agency and technology worlds as a producer. And then actually moved back to Pennsylvania with Jane for about 10 years and lived on a farm and had cows and pigs and chickens and did that. Now we're back in the Northwest and, really love being back on the West Coast.
That's great, man. You got a minute and 18 seconds left. So tell me about you say Whittier. Did you have was it a big family? How many siblings?
No, I had an older brother and an older sister, but both much older, 10 years and 8 years older. So it was great because, in fact, I still have them.
You were the happy miracle, were you?
Yeah, I was the accident. But it was great. They'd give me all their old Elvis Presley 4 season records, and so I inherited all this great music and all this great influence. And also, I was lucky. I went to a really great, incredibly liberal church as a family that was very musically based, and so got to experience a lot of great music there. And just compared to a lot of people, so fortunate. Had a great childhood, a great sort of very cliche
Yeah.
1960s upbringing.
Yeah, I hear you. So who was the musician in your family? Was it your mom or your dad, or was it both?
Actually, neither one.
Oh, really?
They were just music lovers, and so they loved Rodgers and Hammerstein. They loved gospel music. They loved country music. They loved pop, and they would just play it constantly.
It's funny. I remember my mom had all of those albums when I was a kid. And of course, I never became musically inclined, but I remember Camelot. That was the album
Oh yeah.
right? And so it was the Richard Burton one with Julie Andrews,
Yeah.
and it's hilarious because I listened to it over and over again when I was a kid. And just last year we went and got a cabin on Oregon coast. There's this old cabin right on the water, and it was like a time warp. You walked in and there was a turntable with like 600 albums, and there was no internet, there was nothing. And so we just started going through, and I found that album.
Oh man.
And I hadn't listened to it since I was probably 10, and I somehow still knew all the words. It's just like it came back in this incredible, it was an amazing experience. That's what music can do. It stays with you.
Well, the great story about that album, and I'm a huge history freak, uh, is that JFK, that was his favorite album, and every night after work in the White House, he would sit up in the private quarters and listen to Camelot, and that's where the whole Jackie came up with the whole idea of the Camelot.
Yeah, because I remember. Oh, that's great. That's great. And you said Whittier. So I have a question. Were you? I grew up in Southern California too. I grew up in Long Beach. So
Cool.
my dad taught at Long Beach State as an English professor for many years, and so that was my. But I was living in Long Beach at the Whittier earthquake of '87.
Oh yeah,
Were you around at the time?
I was.
Do you remember that?
In fact, I got thrown out of bed.
Me too. I had a huge bookcase, and I mean, books literally came through. I'd never experienced anything like it. I couldn't move.
Yeah. And I remember looking out, we had a swimming pool, and looking out, and there were waves. It was looked like Huntington Beach.
Yeah. That was the biggest one I think I've ever been in, other than the Seattle one, not back in 2000.
Yeah, I was in that one too. I was downtown, and it was funny. I was actually doing my first day at a new job, and I was like the new head of production, right? So I'd gathered all my team in this big glass conference room right downtown, and we're pretty close to the Space Needle, and they were building a hotel across the street in a huge crane. And so I get through my introduction, and I look out the window, and this crane is going like this.
Oh my gosh.
And I suddenly realized I was having a really hard time holding everybody's attention. So we said, okay, well, maybe we should go downstairs.
Yeah, that's and I know we're in for another. If you've been keeping tabs in the news, we are.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, that's a tough one, right, to think about.
Yeah.
Do you remember? So you picked up I was going to ask what your first instrument was. So it sounds like it was a guitar. That was what you picked up first, right?
Actually, that was my second instrument. Actually, my third. I had two failures. First one was violin, which I hated in elementary school. And then the next serious one was accordion. And I did that for a couple of years. I actually had a teacher, and the only thing he would teach me was surf songs. So I was playing, Wipeout and
on accordion.
On accordion. And I thought, something's wrong here. These do not sound right. So that's when I decided to get into guitar. And then, of course, the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and I was hooked.
You were hooked, yeah. And so give me a little brief rundown of your, you sounds like you talked about your friends who worked with a lot of famous people, but you certainly have as well. Tell me about your trajectory in the rock world, how that how did you get what was the first song you wrote? Do you remember your first song, right?
Yeah. It's funny. I still have a recording of it. I was in a band, and I think I was about 14, and I wrote this song called Squirrely, and it was about a guy who meets a seductive squirrel in the woods, and it's basically about molesting squirrels. But it's done to kind of a Chuck Berry vibe, because that was about all I could play. And it actually was fairly popular as a local, kind of novelty tune for the band. So that was fun.
And so you're playing in bands as a teenager. Is it numerous bands, or are you the same group of guys that you were with for the beginning? Or
yeah, actually, before I did bands, I was kind of that young guy with an acoustic guitar doing a solo thing, trying to be very serious, and I lucked into a gig doing USO shows.
Oh wow!
And tours up and down the West Coast, and it was a really wonderful experience. The tour that I was on, the headliners were the Doublemint twins. These two beautiful older girls, and we'd sit on the bus, and they would, just entertain us. But they were great, and it was really funny because we'd play these Air Force or Army bases, and there'd be maybe 3,000 guys, and they're all there just to see the twins, but they put me on first just to just to warm up the audience, and I was the last thing that these guys wanted to see. So it was really good training for how to get
That's
through a
like
tough gig.
you're being paid, and you're being paid to learn your craft, right? And you
Yeah,
get out
yeah,
and to
yeah,
tour and to do all
yeah.
that.
So
Wow.
that was a great entree, and then I got into bands from there, and I played in. I was lucky, to play in some great bands, doing all kinds of stuff, everything from sort of glam and prog stuff, and then had a big horn band for a lot of years. Uh, so really a good exposure to a lot of different genres and needs in terms of guitar and vocal work, which
And
was
then at the
great.
time, were you still predominantly guitar? Was that your
Yeah, yeah. I was always kind of a utility guitar player and vocalist, and sometimes I would be the main vocalist. There were a few bands, like I had a band that played at Knott's Berry Farm in Disneyland, where I was just a singer, which was incredibly awkward not to have a guitar to hold on to.
right?
Um, but that was big fun.
Oh, that's
So a lot of that, and then I sort of, I guess, going back to your question, we started playing more and more in LA at places like the Whiskey and the Starwood and
yeah.
um, the Roxy and
Oh, all the best places, right? Those are the
yeah, I
iconic.
mean, yeah, it was so cool, because I was very, very sensitive to the history, and to be in the dressing rooms at the Whiskey and see stuff from the Doors and Buffalo Springfield, and
Yeah, yeah.
so it was a great misspent youth.
That's great. And then did I read that you were do you worked with, or did you tour with Sting? Is that correct?
No, I did it actually was an interesting moment in the Gabriel Knight sort of trajectory, because it was right as we started GK2, The Beast Within, and I got this offer to work with Paul Allen um, on a new company he was doing. And so I went up to talk to him, and he basically wanted a producer who had a musical background to partner with. Uh, he had two teams at that time. One was with Sting, and one was with Peter Gabriel. So he offered me the one with Sting, and it was basically, to work with Sting as a producer, follow him around for a couple of years, basically with a blank check, and just make cool content. So I had to go back to Jane, in Oakhurst, and say, "I'm sorry, but I got to leave the team
You
and I got
can't
to
turn
move to
that down, right?
Seattle."
That's too much.
Yeah. So it was a great experience, and he
Well, what
was
is that?
just
What was the result? What do we know? I mean, is that something that people can?
yeah, the result was really kind of the first really rich multimedia extravaganza, back at the heyday of CD-ROM. So it was a multi-CD-ROM, really high-end, great new, video and art, a lot of CGI, a lot of stuff done. And it was basically a retrospective of all of his influences and his career. So it was wonderful. We got to interview everybody who he idolized,
Oh man,
which was a real trip.
you're
Uh,
like Forrest Gump. You're like someone who just happened to be a little. You went everywhere. You've been doing all
I
this
get,
stuff.
yeah, I've been really fortunate, and he was just amazing to work with. He would have us to his homes, and he'd throw barbecues, and he would take us around, and um,
You get to
just a
jam with him.
wonderful. I picked up a guitar a couple of times, and the one funny, because it was pretty intimidating
Yeah,
to
yeah,
be
sure.
around that band,
Yeah,
and to say, "Oh, hey, I play too."
yeah.
Um, But I did do that a couple of times. At one time, the really funny story, I picked up an acoustic guitar that was sitting in the corner. This was in his home in England, and it was a beautiful guitar. And I started playing it, and he kind of looked at me with one of the more serious looks he had ever given me, and he just sort of said, um, "That's James' guitar." And James Taylor had left it there the week before.
But you don't just pick up James's guitar. So he's not, you're thinking he's looking at you like, hey, I mean, this guy's pretty good.
Yeah.
And he's saying, what are you doing?
Yeah, he's like, maybe you should put that down. But yeah, it was just one of those magical about 2.5 years.
Now, does that footage exist? Is that out there somewhere? Or is that?
Yeah, and in fact, the product is still available, I think, out on Amazon.
Do you remember what it's called?
Yeah, it's called All This Time.
All This Time.
And it's pretty, I'm very proud of it. We had an amazing team. We were definitely pushing the envelope in terms of what you could do visually and with that kind of a artist.
Well, this is so you get hired in this case again. You're this, known for your compositions and your musician, you're being a musician, but yet you clearly have done so much producing. How do you? I have so much. We can go on to so many. I think this is a great way to kind of get involved in how you eventually got into Sierra. But so when you went to Jane and said, gotta go off to jolly old England with Sting, clearly they decided did they put the project on pause, or how did it work so that you were able to do both?
Yeah, that was a really interesting conversation. Because it was like, hey, by the way, I'm leaving the team and I'm leaving town. And by that time we were a couple. So it was kind of a tense transition.
Oh, bad.
But what we figured, what we were able to do is set it up so that I was still able to do the music. And what I did is a few months later, I had about a 2-week vacation. And so I hung out at my house in Capitol Hill in Seattle and just did all the music for that game in those 2 weeks. And
you did all that music in 2 weeks.
And it just got really lucky that it worked,
Man, you had one of those experiences, that sounds like, where, just everything was flowing and you had I think that artists need deadlines, and they need to be not only deadlines, but they need pressure. Otherwise you can just take forever and meander. And it sounds like you had all this pressure, you had a deadline, you had people that were counting on you, and you were working on all cylinders. I mean, to be able to do all that in 2 weeks, that's you look back at it and think, how the hell did that happen? How did I do that?
Well, like most of the stuff, I mean, I had some wonderful help and support. Jay Usher, who was another great composer at Sierra, came up and helped me with the opera and staging that with the Seattle Opera Company.
I want to definitely talk about that. That's
because that was a totally alien world to me, and he was a great arranger, so he knew how to speak their language.
Oh, good.
But I guess to your point, I totally agree. I think creatives need to be in a box to do their best work. There need to be parameters that force the innovation.
Yeah.
And I've just always done my best work that way.
Yeah.
And I've been really lucky. I mean, growing up sort of leading a lot of those bands, you learn how to be a producer. You learn how to get people to communicate and collaborate. And it just, I kind of always had this dual role of producer and the musical side.
I think, I have a similar yet much smaller, story. I mean, I've worked as an actor for many years, and I just found there was so much limitation in the world that I was in, which so much of it had to do with, you're putting your fate in other people's hands in terms of whether you're going to get hired or whether you're going to get the job. Mm-hmm. And then once you get the job, it's someone else's job. And so maybe you're lucky and you get in this great project with these amazing people and it all works out well, but oftentimes that's not how it works out. You get into this project that you think is going to be great, and then the people involved aren't creating the they're not creating something that as high quality as maybe you were hoping.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it became clear to me a little later in my career than I wished that I need to balance that. I have to have projects that I can produce and control so that I can do this other thing as well. Because with just doing, there just isn't enough. So I feel like that sense of balance of being able to produce and then being able to create. And if those things cross over, great. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And, that was one of the wonderful things about Sierra and specifically with Gabriel Knight is that I officially had both roles. So, as producer, I owned the project and I, needed to feed and, take care of the team. And then as composer, I,
Yeah.
had to deliver. So I literally, would spend the first half of my day being producer, and then I'd turn around in the afternoons. I had my keyboard behind my desk and I'd turn around and write music all afternoon. So it was great. I could use both sides of my brain.
Did you have, were you, when you were producing and a moment flashed in your musical brain, were you able to just take a quick time out and go, or were you pretty good at like saying this part of the day producer, this part of the day musician, or were you able to?
I would, I'd find little ways to sort of quickly archive an idea,
Yeah.
and just so I could do something with it later. But yeah, it was a fun challenge.
Well, this is a great segue. So I'd love to know. So tell me, so how did you get involved in Sierra? How did you find them? How did they find you? What was that experience like?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, I had never played a game before Sierra. I barely knew what they were. Um, they had hired my wife at, then as creative director.
And this
We were
was
at,
not Jane. This was your
this was not Jane. This was
okay.
my ex-wife. And we actually were living up here in the Northwest on Bainbridge Island, and she
Oh,
got this amazing offer. And so we decided, well, we might as well, because it was right next to Yosemite and we love the mountains. So we said, what the heck. So we moved down and I found myself sort of, 10 miles from Yosemite and in this little town with not a lot to do. And I thought, well, okay, maybe I'll see if they need some musical support. And so I went to Mark Siebert and said, hey, I've done a fair amount of stuff in LA and I think this is really interesting. I've got a background in film composing and can you use me? I'd be happy to help out. And it just sort of went from there and he, very graciously made me a part of the team. And
how big was Sierra at the time? Was it?
it was, I think, a little under 300 people.
Okay, so
But that was, the majority of the town. So,
right, yeah, right.
and these were fairly smart, fairly creative people. So, you can imagine, they were pretty bored.
Yeah. What was the
And
vibe like in those early days? Was it pretty freewheeling, or was there competitions? Was it collaborative? What was that whole feeling like?
it was totally the Wild West. I mean, it was great because we knew there were no rules. Uh, and to Ken and Roberta's credit, they built a culture that could thrive with that. And it wasn't a competitive culture. It was highly collaborative. I mean, you mentioned some of the other folks, that you've worked with. And all of those teams, we were all just down the hallway from each other. And if somebody needed somebody, if I needed to borrow a developer or an artist or somebody who was great at something else, we all just sort of wanted to make the work better. So it was one of those rare corporate dynamics
Yeah,
where it really was about the work.
yeah.
And
And
it made
would
it.
you say that when did when did they jump the shark? Was it after Seattle? I mean, I know that when did it get to when do you feel like it was the absolute heyday? And then when did you feel like, and how long were you there? When did you end up leaving?
Um, I was there, I guess, about 4 years. And, um, I stayed involved after I left for a few years just because of my partnership with Jane.
Yeah.
So So I had kind of an interesting perspective. But, you know, from my perspective, once they left Oakhurst and went up to Seattle, it became more about, you know, how do we position ourselves,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
to be acquired, and, you know, all of those things that happen once a corporation gets to a certain point.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was just different.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So I don't know this story, and I hope, please just tell me to, so it's not, so what little I know right now is you were married to a woman who who got hired at Sierra. You ended up getting hired, but now you are married, and happily so, with Jane Jensen for many years. I imagine there must be some drama that was involved in all of that.
Well, it was interesting actually, because my ex and I split before I started at Sierra, and it was a kind of, you know, one of those things, because she already worked inside Sierra, where you know, some people were like totally cool and open to me, and some people who already knew her felt that it was complex,
Yeah.
you know. So but the great thing is, once I got in, and we were all great friends, and we always have been. um, the funny thing is, there were points where myself, my ex, Jane, my ex's new partner, would all have to work together on projects, and it
Wow.
was, you know,
I
we
almost feel
had to
like
take the high road.
yeah, I feel like in some ways, if you're forced to get past, that takes you out of whatever it is that wasn't working, and it's putting you in an environment where doesn't have to do with your personal life. And I don't know, I can see where maybe that might have some real value to it.
Yeah, and you know, we were really fortunate. We have a wonderful daughter, and you know, we worked for this great company, and we both, you know, literally, we would hand her off, you know, every other night, and it was wonderful because
Yeah,
we could do that, and we all lived in a little town together,
yeah,
and so it was just, you know, in that situation, it was the best it could possibly
yeah.
be.
So tell me, how did you end up meeting Jane, and was it through Gabriel Knight? Where did you guys get partnered together? How did that work out?
I was a producer and composer already, for other projects, and she, you know, had come in as a writer and designer. I got assigned to a project with her prior to Gabriel Knight that we did some pre-production on, but didn't really mature. Um, and then uh, I got assigned as her producer for Gabriel Knight, and this was right at the very beginning, before it had even been really approved by Ken. So I was able to really partner with her from day one, as she was developing it, which made a huge difference for me as a composer.
Yeah, yeah, neat. And then so that's when your relationship blossomed during the making of those.
It was, and it was funny because, you know, if you think about the history of Sierra, there's all these couples, you know, from Ken and Roberta on down. But evidently, technically, the company had a position about, you know, not encouraging couples. So when Jane and I were first sort of, you know, building our relationship as friends and then as a couple, we actually had to really not have that be evident
Mm,
for a few months as it was developing. And the funny thing is, you know, in Oakhurst, there was nothing to do, so you had to actually drive to Fresno to go to a movie or a
right,
restaurant, you know.
right.
And we thought, you know, we were being really sneaky. We went to have dinner and do a movie in Fresno.
Everybody from Sierra's there.
And we're sitting in the theater waiting for the movie, and half our team walks in. You know, it's like, oh, okay,
Yeah, cover blown. That's
yep,
hilarious. Oh,
yep.
that's funny. Well, I love it. That's great. So, yeah, you talked a little bit. I just got a couple of that. So, I have to ask, and I've got a lot of questions from fans, much about Gabriel Knight and the two different ones. And
Sure.
and, and funny, have you ever, a question I have to ask you is, have you ever personally played the games?
I had played portions of them. I'm actually, you know, really probably not detailed enough to enjoy the games. You know, I would sit down, and usually when I would write, I'd write to a piece of art that the art director would give me, um, or a description Jane would give me about a character. Uh, and then, once we got into later production, I would have to play parts of the games, just to make sure the music was working, and I
Right,
didn't
right.
need to make changes and stuff. But I've never been a gamer, and I've
Yeah,
always
no, I
said,
think
hey,
it's funny, most of the artists that I've spoken with are very much the same. I think I've spoken to, I don't know, 12, 13 people now over the last year, and very few of them have played the games that they worked on. It's the
yeah,
working on it is what's exciting, and not the game playing. So I played Phantasmagoria 2 for the first time in my life. I've never played
yeah,
it, never had any interest in it, because
wow.
it means having to watch myself, because I'm in every frame of that of that game.
Yeah,
So I bit the bullet and just spent the last few months, a month, sort of streaming myself playing. It's one of the most surreal experiences, watching my 25-year younger self, go through all
oh
of
yeah,
these events.
totally.
Were you around during that game, or both the other Phantasmagoria? Were you
Oh
involved in
yeah,
either of those?
I was around during Phantas One. In fact, we were just down the hall from each other, those teams,
They filmed that.
and
They filmed the first one there, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and there was a lot of synergy and a lot of learnings that went on between that project and GK2 because of the same approach in general, and a lot of the video issues and all of that. So um, there was always kind of an ear to the ground between both teams about what you know might
Nice.
might be good to know.
That's great. That's great. And I have to ask too. Did you, as I know, Gary Spinrad? He did he composed the music for Phantas 2, and I uh, had a great conversation with him, and he talked about, and I think that this was something Ken and Roberta were quite good at doing, is they picked young raw talent and gave them their first shot. And Gary
Mhm.
said he was right out of college. He had done hardly anything. He submitted something, and they gave him the shot, and he created something that people still talk about. And I
Yeah,
wonder, were
yeah.
you around with him, or was there any did you guys ever cross paths?
I think I was actually on my way out as he was coming in. So we didn't cross paths a lot, but that's a totally valid description of what I think made Ken and Roberta really powerful, was that they'd find great people. I mean, Jane had no formal background as a game designer uh, when she was hired as a writer, and they were open to understanding what people were really capable of, and a lot of these people were triple threats. A lot of us could do more than one thing fairly well, and they were open to exploiting that in a good way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's it is exploitation, but when you're young and hungry, you want to be exploited. You
Yeah,
want
absolutely,
you want your chance. And if it's
absolutely. Yeah.
so yeah, there's got to be a right combination of that. Um, awesome. Okay, well, listen, I think this is the perfect time to just transfer over to a few of the questions that have popped in. I'm going to
Mhm.
start. I try to do this, and I don't always get people taking advantage of it, but I've got a couple video submissions, and the first one, not surprisingly, they're both from musicians themselves, and I
Uh-huh.
thought I'll just share this with you real quick and see. This first one is from his name is Connor. Okay, let's see what Connor has to say.
Hello, Robert. My question for you is probably the same questions that I asked Gary Spinrad when he was on, which is what is your favorite piece of equipment that you used in composition or software? And any words for aspiring composers?
Well, okay. Well, it's interesting, Connor, looking at the clip, because I have both of those synths that you have behind you. And the K2000 that you have there was pretty much my workhorse during GK. And then I moved on to a K2600, which I still have and use as one of my main pieces of gear. And I have the Wave Station, which is a great synth. But um, I it's actually, if you talk to some of the other guys at Sierra, my position as a composer is sort of much more hybrid or analog. than MIDI based, though, of course, these days it has to be MIDI based at some point. But during the early games, a lot of what I would do is pretty much record stuff as I would, in an old studio, and then just sort of force it into the digital realm. And I was lucky from GK2 on to pretty much be able to do that at an audio level versus, the pings and pongs of early MIDI.
And then in terms of any advice for the young composer?
Well, it's so different now. And the composing world has matured so much, and there's so much capability. There are some great folks out there who are really, really active right now in the world of composing for various media, and most of them, thankfully, are doing very cool YouTube series where they're talking about the issues. They talk about contracts. They talk about how to get your work done. Things like that are really valuable. Also, there's a lot of great competitions for people like Spitfire and other, companies who create the tools will run annual competitions that give new composers a place to have their work considered, which is great. So, I think in general, you just have to keep banging on the door.
Absolutely.
Any way you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, cool. So now the next one here is actually from a working composer. And if I'm going to try to jog your memory, you may not remember this. I think this was back in 2016, but you were asked to join I think it was just a telephone interview that was for it was for a joint composers interview for Greek adventure game site called Adventure Advocate. And you ended up speaking to a couple of young composers, and they were very, very thankful that you took the time to do this. And his name is, I'm going to say his name wrong, Chris Christodoulou from, I believe, he might be, I know he's from Greece, but he has a little question for you as well.
Cool.
Hi, Robert. Hi, Paul. This is Chris. I'm super excited to see Robert in Conversations with Curtis. As you can see, I'm a huge Gabriel Knight fan. I consider the games among my all-time favorites. I want to ask Robert about his musical influences when he was young, like the music that inspired him, the music that he listened to growing up, and to what degree this has been incorporated in his musical output, both in games and just his own albums. Yeah, that's it. I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the interview. Greetings from Greece. Bye.
That's great. Yeah. There are a few folks that I'm in contact with from Greece, and it seems to be one of the countries. It's funny. I think the dramatic nature of the GK music maybe resonates more in certain cultures. But in terms of influences, I was really fortunate. I got exposed to almost everything. And I have a deep love of a lot of melodic, emotional music, things such as Rodgers and Hammerstein, film scores by people like Max Steiner, all the great rock and roll from the 50s and the 60s, anything that really is memorable and melody.
And some of that music, because that seems so counterintuitive with some of the scope and dramatic, nature of what's in Gabriel Knight. How does this rock and roll stuff find its way into the the score of GK2?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there were definitely parts of GK1 where some of that passion and you could probably draw lines to things like the use of dynamics by people like the Who or where you're using chordal power to create punch and dynamics, things like that. So a lot of that influence as a guitar player by all of those great 60s bands definitely helped my education in dynamics. Later on, I got exposed to a lot of wonderful, composers in the world of film scoring, and you know, I like to point people back to, especially, probably my all-time favorite film score is for a movie called Key Largo,
The
which is
original
Max
one?
Steiner, the original one.
Oh, wow, with that Bogart, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, there is an opening sequence that Max Steiner did for that film. And I think it's about 12 minutes. And that piece of music encapsulates the entire scope of that movie
Oh,
in one
man.
piece of music.
Oh, I
And it
gotta
was,
watch it again.
yeah, it's just
Is
things
it is
things
it
like
is it
that.
in the beginning of the film, or is it something
Yeah,
that, okay.
it's in the beginning, and it just runs the course of the plot all within one piece of music. Uh,
Wow.
and he does it in such an elegant way, you don't even know it's washing over you. But I was really, I've always been a Hollywood history freak. I was lucky to, spend a lot of years in Hollywood and be on a lot of those old lots. And I was just, anytime I'm there, I'm just in heaven. It's like, I must have been there in a past life.
Yeah.
Um, so that stuff was a big influence.
That's great. All right, I'm going to try to run through some of these. Ziltoid Rincewind. Some of these names they go by their handles, so I don't know them personally.
Yeah.
But he asks, which of your pieces would you say you are most proud of? That your favorite work, and then also what was the most which piece gave you the most difficulty to create the mood desired?
Wow.
Two-parter.
It's hard to pick a favorite. I have a couple that I'm just really connected to. Things like Grace's theme from GK, which I just really, you know, I just have a great emotional connection
I've been
to it.
listening to the piano version of that quite a bit. It's so beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, we'll play a couple moments from both.
Thank you. David's theme from Gray Matter, again, for me, I just love the simplicity. A lot of these individual tunes, I don't really take credit for creating them. I just, was sort of fortunate to help bring them out somehow, and they wrote themselves. And that's a very powerful experience
I
to
bet.
be a part of. Yeah.
Yeah, was it? Did you watch the Beatles doc of the Beatles Get Back?
Yeah.
I mean, that moment of watching Get Back just come out of thin air while he's playing his bass like a guitar, and I mean, just all of a sudden you see it get birthed. I mean, it's just an amazing.
Yeah.
So
It's, from a casual idea. Yeah.
yeah, isn't that something?
Yep.
And so luckily you've had that, you can, I relate to that experience where something can just come out of you and you didn't know it was there, right?
Yeah. And, I've been really lucky. There have been points, like, for instance, when we did Möebius, I had to do a lot of commuting at the time because I had another day gig in an agency. And so I would take a recorder with me in the car, and I would just whistle things that would come into my head while I was sitting in traffic. And I've always just been really lucky that a lot of that stuff later became valuable.
Yeah.
So you just never know.
Right. And the second part of that question is interesting. Did you ever find yourself, because obviously you are constantly having to create music that suits or creates a mood that you're trying to achieve within this game. So whether it's, suspense or humor or whatever it is that you're trying to do, is it easy to think in those terms of what you're trying in terms of how to create mood? And do you find yourself getting stuck in that and the right sound to the right action?
I'm kind of selfish in how I approach that stuff. I tend to sort of digest the work that I'm trying to address, like the storyline or the concept, and then I just want to do what I feel and hear musically. So it may or may not actually be the best fit for a specific, when it comes to like traditional film scoring, where you're really doing underscoring. I'm probably not as strong there as I am just sort of, hey, I'm going to create a memorable musical moment.
Yeah.
and then I'm going to shoehorn it onto this because that's what I want.
Right, right.
But yeah, it's, obviously the opera in GK2 was a very specific challenge, especially for an old rock and roll guy.
Yeah.
To have Jane sort of say, "Hey, would you write me an opera?"
Which is that's one of the most. See, again, I came to this late, so I'm just doing all this research, and we'll talk about all these questions. We're leading to the opera, and I finally sat down, and that has to be one of the most amazing things. It blew my mind to think that in a video game at the end, you're going to have a 10-minute Wagnerian opera in Germany, not only just the opera, but also creating, there are different movements within those 10 minutes, and you've got to stage it, and you're doing some sort of commedia dell'arte. It's mind-boggling what you guys achieved. The
whole thing about ignorance is bliss, right? And we were really, we were just passionate about the story. And Jane and I, went to Europe and spent a lot of time researching.
Oh, so did you go to Germany and look at the castles and do all that?
So we hung out, in Munich, and we went to Bavaria, and I went to Wagner's grave and apologized for what I was about to do because I knew I had no idea. But I did know, going back to the question about gear, I did know, the Kurzweil samplers were pretty much the first samplers ever. And I knew, hey, I could probably do some real trombones on one of these if I loaded up with a bunch of trombone samples. And my perception as a rock guy was, oh, Wagner, it's all trombones. So I just sort of said, okay, I'm going to write dramatic melodies, fill it with a bunch of trombones, and we'll call it Wagner.
Okay, so this is the perfect time. So I'm going to share a little bit. I found it's a YouTube clip, and we can't watch much, but I want to share this. I want to share just a little bit. I know that anybody who knows your work has seen this, but I think it would be fun to watch you watch it. So let's see what I can do here. So I just queued it up to it's like, again, I feel like there are probably 3 or 4 movements in this piece. Am I right?
Yep.
And it has a little bit of variety. So I just want to share this moment here. Hopefully it doesn't go straight to a commercial. If it does, I'll edit it out. Here we go.
Nicht zu verstehen, ich vermag. Es ist doch mein Hochzeitstag. Der Jäger, beschleicht sein Opfer. Es ist nur ein Scherz, Baron. Ich hoffe, Sie fangen den.
So you're telling this story, you're telling a story with music, and it's, again, I'm kind of coming at this late, but what I'm seeing is it's almost like you're trapping the antagonist by telling his story and having him watch it himself and recognize himself at the end, and you have, as it looks like Gabriel Knight is on there. He's trapped as part of the clown group. So you're telling a humorous story. You are telling the story within the opera, and at the same time, you're also telling the overall story of what's happening at this point in the game. And you're writing it in opera, and you're writing it in German. How high were you when you first came up with this idea?
Well, anybody who knows Jane knows that it's very hard to say no to Jane. She doesn't do anything small or halfway. So, I knew this had to work somehow. And we had been fortunate. We lived in Seattle. We'd seen the Seattle company do The Ring. We went to Vienna and watched a bunch of Wagner operas in Vienna, which was just an amazing experience. And, I don't necessarily agree with the guy's politics, but his music, there are moments that are just transcendent. So it was a great challenge from that point. But, I watch that clip, and I think, as an actor, I know you can, relate to this. I think about all the grief that the poor Seattle opera singers, felt trying to deal with an old rock and roll guy like me trying to tell them how to
What do you
sing it.
remember about that experience? Or did you get the sense that they were just like so bored and couldn't believe they were doing it? Or were they having fun? Or how was that?
I think they were probably frustrated because, I came from a studio world where it's like, oh, if it's not quite working or you need it to change a little, you just say, okay, everybody, hey, lean into it more or sit back more. You can't do that with opera singers. If it's not on the paper, they are not going to do it. And so it was great that Jay was there to help me with that. But I think they were probably frustrated. And it was funny when we got to the Moore Theater to shoot it.
Oh, after the Moore, they did it at the Moore.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I was sitting out, in the theater seats as they were shooting, and some of the other actors were sitting close by, and I had to laugh because I heard one of the guys lean over to another one, and he was like, "Who wrote this shit?" And I just thought, yeah, he's not far off, but but it was, it was a great. I'm still very proud of it, and I love the fact that people embraced it and gave it enough latitude that it could work in the context.
One of our fans talked about. He talked to MDQP, who had some questions, but I'm not gonna. I feel like time being of the essence. I want to just move on a little bit, but he talked about how. He mentioned the Voodoo Lounge in Gabriel Knight 1. Just the background sound, the drums, and how it just immediately created a mood. What I thought was kind of interesting, and we'll just watch this, but really just to hear it. And it's the game itself, so you're going to hear some voices. Mm-hmm. But this is the original game. Again, we'll just hear a little bit of this. Let me see if I can turn this up. There it is. Okay.
Gabriel wonders if that drummer is one of the cartel's messengers.
Very simple. We can get something else in a second here.
Gabriel can't hear the street drummer very clearly in this location.
So that's where you were with that particular piece, right? Anything about that just that jogs a memory?
Yeah, that was one of the interesting problems with the early games was that, like, for instance, what you're playing is probably the Sound Blaster version of that tune. So when we would do a tune, I would record it in a fairly, produced way as the top level. And then for each version of the technology, it would get watered down more and more and simpler and simpler. So it was always kind of painful to hear, when you end up being a bunch of bleeps. But that, again, that was going back to our earlier conversation. That was one of the cool challenges. How can I do something that's going to work on both ends of that spectrum and still be, valuable and still memorable?
Yeah, and then you get this rare opportunity that not many people get in art or life of a do-over. You decide to do the game again, right? And you upgrade. You basically do it from beginning to end. And what was that experience like?
And it was crazy because 20 years later, half of that music I hadn't heard in 20 years. So a lot of it I actually had to learn as if I was learning somebody else's music, and there were parts of it where I thought, wow, this is pretty good. I bet I couldn't do that now. And there are parts where I think, what was I thinking? But it was very humbling.
That's good. Well, let's listen and watch the newer version, the 20th anniversary of that same room.
The voodoo shrine is filled with items that both fascinate Gabriel and also make his skin crawl.
So again, just there's a richer sound. You're playing with the same kind of mood. You've created that same thing, but now you're able to probably take that maybe that sound was there originally and that never got condensed, and now you're able to bring it to this.
Yeah, it's so nice to be able to work in audio versus MIDI. And there are guys who can do amazing stuff in MIDI, and I was never one of them. So I have a lot of admiration for that. And a lot
Yeah.
of those guys were at Sierra. Um, but yeah, it's very freeing to be able to record it the way you hear it.
And then I hear the voices too, and so you are also. Did you also produce? You produced
Yeah,
the second version
yeah.
as well? So you had to recast it, and you brought some members back from the original cast, and
Well, I guess to correct you, I was the producer on the first version. Was not the producer on the second
okay,
version.
okay,
But a good friend, Sabine Duval, was, and so we still partnered on stuff. But doing the voiceover sessions on GK1 was a real treat. Jane and I went down to LA, and to be able to do sessions with Tim Curry and Mark Hamill, and it was
yeah. Tell us a little bit about that
fun.
experience. Were you so you got to be you were in the room when they did all their recordings, and how long?
Yeah, and it was great. I mean, I had a pretty rich voiceover background from my years in LA, where I'd worked with a lot of great actors, and in fact, I was the engineer for the original Power Rangers series,
Oh,
so
wow.
we did a lot of voice acting work for that. Um, but yeah, it was great, to be. All of these artists were, at this point in time, they were very excited to be doing this kind of work. It was sort of the bleeding edge at that time. And Tim and Mark were both hilarious. And I had a great time with Tim during breaks. We'd get together and stand around and sing songs. Because
Really?
he's incredibly musical. He had a great
Oh
solo
yeah. Well,
album.
geez, that Rocky Horror, he knocks it out of the park, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it was just a total joy.
I'll bet. Well, you were kind enough to send me the link to his audition, and why don't we listen to? So he auditioned. He had to audition. So this is Tim Curry, who is auditioning for Robert Holmes. And so how is it that he came to the audition? How did you guys get this? And then let's listen to a little bit. He does a little bit of. He does like 4 takes of the same series of lines. We'll listen to the first 2, but before I play that for you, tell me how did you end up having Mark Hamill audition for you for a voiceover?
Well, Jen and I just sort of blue skied. Who would we like to have if we could pick anybody? So we put together this crazy list, thinking we'd never get any of them, and we gave it to an agent who Sierra was using in LA, and a director, great director, Stu Rosen, who was connected to all these guys. And Stu, called us back and said, "Oh yeah, I can get a lot of these guys." So, the thing with the audition for Tim, I think, was just because we thought it was a great idea, but we really weren't sure he could do the accent since he was English.
Right.
So we just kind of wanted to hear some of that.
Oh, that's great. Well, as an actor, it's a real joy to see or to hear anyway in this situation. You come in with your first take on something, and then oftentimes, you're going to get direction, and they're going to ask you to go in a different direction. And so it seems like in this case, he brought in 4 different takes, just wanted you to let you know that here are the 4 different ways he can do it. And we'll listen to the first 2, and you can just tell immediately just how different and how quick he is to just be able to jump with things. So let's listen to this real quick. Oh, buffering. Give it a quick little.
This is the Special Artists Agency auditioning for the role of Gabriel Knight. This is Tim Curry as Gabriel Knight.
I hope you're insulting the size of my brain. That's all I wanted to know. And yes, my dear, Malia Getty is the most dangerous-looking diversion I've ever seen. Ouch! Speaking of yin and yang, could you just shoot me? Knight, Gabriel Knight. In
Those are like
case someone
4
wants
little
to know.
clips, right?
Excuse me, but your eyes are really distracting. I don't think I've ever seen a color quite like that brownish gold. It's so deep and rich. Man, if I could bottle that, I'd make a fortune. Sure, but could you say that one more time and pout your lips more?
This is take 2.
Here's take 2. Just listen to the.
I hope you're insulting the size of my brain. That's all I wanted to know. And yes, my dear, Malia Getty is the most dangerous
Picking it
looking
up,
diversion
right?
I've ever seen. Ouch!
He just takes it to another level.
Yeah.
Speaking of yin and yang, could you just shoot me?
Anyways, it's just really neat stuff, and it must have been a joy to hear that, and then actually bring him in and work with him. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's so brilliant. We could just riff. If they had a problem with the gear or something, we were down for a while, we would just riff. For on and on, because he could just tell these wonderful stories.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, listen, let me see if I can do a couple. I just want to make sure some of these folks. Gray Matter and Möebius both feel. Russell A. August says Gray Matter and Möebius feel like extensions of Gabriel Knight's scores in some way. I think Gray Matter might even be better in some cases. Do you think there's some truth there, that there's some extension to those
Yeah, I think that's true. And I kind of think of GK3 as the bridge between GK2 and Gray Matter. The cool thing with Gray Matter was with using the Scarlet Furies and their music, it just gave a whole new leg on the table. And so it actually took some pressure off of the vehicles that I might have been known for in the GK series. And I think it just gave me a little more freedom.
Yeah.
To be a little more subtle.
Yeah, he also mentions, are you aware of the David Byrne book, How Music Works?
Yeah.
And he talks about how venue, I'll read this. One of the main topics is how menu influences music artistically more than many musicians care to admit. And when he says venue, he means anything from churches to bars to headphones or compression algorithms. And under that definition, games are a venue. And so he's curious how working in a game affects the art of scoring.
Yeah, that's a great resource. Just about anything that comes out of David Byrne's head is worth considering. For me, the great thing about games, it had two sides that were really valuable. One was, especially for Jane and I, we really wanted to do something very cinematic, something more mature, more dramatic than might have been done at that point. So there was that. And then on the other side, the great thing with games is that you have this problem where people can be sitting in a room for hours, for days, sometimes for weeks, trying to get their way out of it. So you have to write something that's people can tolerate in that dynamic. And there's a couple of times where I probably crossed the line. Like, I used a whistle in a police station in GK, and I just, now I listen to it and I think, oh, people must have hated hearing that. But
yeah, especially if you have to get up and go to the bathroom and it's just whistling.
That's right. Or you've got a dog, But most of the time, that was a great box to be put in. It's like, how can I write something simple, memorable, but that you're not going to get sick of?
Yeah.
It was a great challenge.
That's great. Well, then, but before I let you go, Robert, I'd love to just know a little bit. You've been working really hard. First of all, is it 5 or 6 years ago you created a piano? You made an album of just simple piano. You've transcribed is it all of GK2?
Actually, it's a accumulation of different pieces from all of the GKs and Gray Matter. And well, we did, this was a few years ago, as you mentioned, a great pal of mine, Roger Hooper, who's a wonderful pianist. I'm a guitar player who plays piano. He's a real pianist. And so he was gracious enough to do the performances and to interpret the songs in a way that was sort of elevated them.
Yeah.
And so we thought, well, let's do a collection like this. And people seem to have really enjoyed it. And frankly, I don't know if, it's probably sick in some way, but I love to listen to it, in my car, and it just feels like somebody else's music.
I've read so much, and again, as I've done so many people have commented about that album and just how much they love it. I mean, I think people love your soundtrack to, Gabriel Knight has such a fondness for people's hearts, but that's really, really neat. And so now you have a new brainchild. You just did a Kickstarter for a new project, and let me just quickly show this so people can see it, and then you can talk us through it a little bit.
Sure.
Let me just do the right thing. It's going to take me a second to find it. No, it's going to be right here. But yeah, why don't you, here, let me see. I found the Indiegogo page. So you've already done the Kickstarter, right?
Yeah, we did a Kickstarter that ended actually on January 1. And going back to your original idea about being put in a box, I wanted to do a specific concept that I hoped people would embrace relevant to all of these past games. And what happened was Jane and I moved from the East Coast back to the West Coast, and I was setting up my studio, and I set up some of the old gear I used to use in GK, and I started playing it, and suddenly I was writing GK kind of music. And I thought, well, there's more of this, obviously, that wants to come out. Maybe I'll see if anybody would be interested in me doing more in this vein. Because, in the world of games, who knows now, when or what the next game opportunity will be. So I thought, okay, I'll put together this concept of sequel, which is as if there were going to be more GK games or more games in the sort of Robert Jane world, that I would do music based on that. And thankfully, people, were so supportive and into the idea, and we did really well on the Kickstarter. So I spent the last month in kind of fulfillment hell, getting some of the physical rewards out, and now I can sit down and just think about music. And so I'm going to be writing and producing the album. It'll come out next fall. We're going to do a vinyl version. We'll also be doing sheet music, and also a cool thing, we're running a cover contest where people have been submitting their covers of any of my music, and we're going to include some of those in the album because there's just some amazing work that people are doing in terms of
fantastic. In terms of, it's like one of the things so it's a new album, a collection of fully produced dramatic game themes in the style of Gabriel Knight. So you're creating an album of game music, but it's not attached to a game yet. Right. Or is this, sure. How do you see this? Is this something simply for people to listen and enjoy? Is this something that people would be able to license for certain? How does this want to be? Well,
it's mainly for enjoyment, for listening. And it's kind of, I always joke and I always give Jane a hard time. I always say, hey, the writing in the game is fine, but it's the music that really makes the show.
Of course.
You can imagine how that goes over. But it's kind of the manifestation of that. It's like, well, hey, I don't need a game. I'll just go ahead and do the music anyway. It's kind of that. But it's great. I feel really fortunate because it's given me a great creative box for this coming year.
Yeah.
And, to get up and focus on every day.
What's the time frame? When are you hoping to record it? When are you hoping to?
I'm hoping to spend about 2 to 3 months writing, and then, we'll produce and master it and hope to get it out sometime around September, November.
Do you have musicians lined up to work with you? Or are you doing it all yourself?
Yeah, I'll probably do the majority of it myself, which, it's amazing what we can do
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
But I'll also have some guests in, like Roger Hooper will certainly be doing some of the string arrangements and things. And, we'll probably have some other folks as a part of it too. So
One final thing before I let you go and before we end up uh, opening things up to a live Q&A with our fans here is I know that people are very interested in, a lot of our fans are trying to kickstart their own projects. And so you just ran a very successful Kickstarter campaign. I'm sure that was not an easy project. I'm sure that took a lot of effort and time. And any advice or any just thoughts about the Kickstarter world that you dealt with on your journey to get this project going?
Well, I was lucky. I mean, this is actually the second time. Jane and I were kind of early in the Kickstarter world when we did our Pinkerton Road company. We were really fortunate. We did a huge Kickstarter, which was one of the largest at the time, and sort of it was a great training ground for the good, the bad, and the ugly of Kickstarter. And that ended up funding 3 games and was a really valuable experience. So there were a lot of things I learned that I tried to apply this time.
Was it easier this time?
It was easier sort of knowing where some of those potholes are.
Yeah.
I think also, you just have to understand that when you do something that's crowdfunded, what you might, in a traditional dynamic, you sort of create work and then you wait for the world to react to it and, maybe make money off it or whatever your goal is. In a Kickstarter world, the value has to be evident in the idea. You get that support up front, and then there's comparatively, you got to produce. And then after that, there's not that sort of wave of reaction very often. So it's an interesting change in how that works as an artist.
It just completely flips it flips things over. It's like 180-degree difference, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Huh.
But it's a great vehicle if it works right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it sure seems like it's working right for you, and I know that you surpassed your original goal, but as well, I know, the goal was to just get things going, but to be able to get it going at the level that it always could use some more support. So if anybody wants to hop on, I think it's switched over to Indiegogo now, where you can actually add to that, and I'll make sure that goes into the link. And if people are so inclined to help support this project, it sounds amazing, and I can't wait to hear what you come up with.
Yeah, thanks. And we want people, if people want to be a part of it, we want to continue to give them a place to do that. And there are a lot of cool things that are a part of the experience beyond the music. There's things with memorabilia and other kinds of things that Jane and I have done to kind of help make it a richer experience.
And so, I think in a short email that you exchanged, you and I had, you mentioned, is Jane working on a book right now? Is she on something on her own project, or?
She's always working on books. She's got several in motion right now. We're also, as you said, we're in a very interesting period where there's a lot of nostalgia and romance around the kind of stuff that we do, and so we're very hopeful that there could be some more opportunities.
Everybody! I mean, people want, if you're teasing a GK4 or in the next one, I think you would blow some people's minds to think that might happen someday. Is that a possibility?
Well, what Jane and I have always said is we love working together. We'd love to do more. We're open to that. Some of the stuff we control, like gray matter, some of the stuff we don't, like GK. But the good news is, there's always change and new opportunities being created, and we're totally,
and now that Microsoft has taken over, there might be a little bit. There potentially could be some more open ears about some of this.
And they're just a ferry right away from us.
Exactly. Are you still? Are you on a? Where are you these days? Are you still in Bainbridge, or?
No, we're over near Port Townsend.
Oh, so you like these little port towns? I love it. You guys, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, we love the nature. We love walking and hiking and water. And
that's the best. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Robert Holmes, thank you so much for joining me. It's a real pleasure talking to you. I don't feel like this was an interview at all. I feel like I got a chance to just chat with someone, a super cool dude who has a lot of fun stories.
Well, thanks for having me, and
Yeah.
you know, I always appreciate the opportunity
Yeah.
to talk about it.
All right, good. Well, I will let you go, and we'll talk to you soon. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording right now. And so there we go. Oh, let me make sure I'm. So yeah, that was my conversation with Robert. That was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks all for sticking around. And for those of you who have stuck around, I am so grateful and lucky to have Robert joining us right now.
You hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me, Robert? Oh, let me see. I'm going to unmute myself. There we go. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let me get you on here. So, Robert Holmes, let me get my...
I can.
Oh, you know what? Let's see.
Can you hear
Hold
me?
on a second. Hold on.
Yep.
There we are. Okay. It's all about the OBS system. It's a little bit funky. I'm going to have to do a little bit of changing around here. Hold on just a second. Get rid of that. That usually does the work. Oh, for goodness sakes. Hey, I'm going to take a second and finish this. Thank you, Robert, for taking the time to join me today and take time out of your and I want to make sure everybody can hear you. If you're talking, will you say hello?
Check 1, 2.
Oh, yeah, there you go. You're great. All right, so now let me put this all together, and I think we are pretty close together. All right. Happy Sunday. It's nice to see you again.
Happy Sunday.
And thank you for taking some time. This is my chance to let for me to stop asking you questions and letting some of our fans do so. I see there's been a lot of chatting in the chat. Any thoughts just before we get started here?
Nope. Just it's great. It's great to see so many folks on and asking cool questions.
Yeah. Well, I know that you and Helen Larson have talked a little bit during the chat, and her question or his. I'm not sure if Helen is a man or a woman, but Robert said, Robert, how long did you practice your voice and talent each day? Did you overwork yourself, and did you ever get the thought to just give up?
It's funny, and hopefully you can hear me okay. I recently, started with a new doctor. So, you have that first meeting with the doctor, and he listened to me for a while, and then he said, your voice, we could probably fix that. And I said, my voice has been like this since I was 17 after my first, tour where I oversang for a couple of years. And did a lot of rock and roll singing the wrong way. And I actually had to do a year where I couldn't speak, where I had to write notes. So, I guess the short story is I was always playing guitar. I was one of those people who carried it around with me and took it everywhere. I remember awkwardly going to holiday family events, and I'd take my guitar, and so for me, I didn't so much sit down and do 2 or 3 hours a day. I just was always playing, and then, singing. I was just lucky to be a part of a lot of singing groups, both in school and outside. So I was always doing that.
Great. Roger Hooper Music wrote at one point, wanted to know if you had made CDs of Refrain when it was first released and what the status of that is now.
Yeah, as somebody asked, I do have, I know there were some CDs available online. I still have, a pretty good quantity. If people do have an interest in a CD, they can contact me through the contact page of the website. And I'll make sure they get one, so we can work that
out. Great, Nelson Miguel, Robert. Besides GK and Jane's games, what are your favorite Sierra titles, and more specifically, the best OST?
Wow, That's really hard, especially since I'm not a gamer. But I know I always enjoyed the work by guys like Aubrey Hodges, Dan Kaler, Jay Usher, Mark Siebert. I mean, all of the guys, Chris, all of the guys did really interesting. Neil, who did amazing guitar-based MIDI scores. Each one of the guys had a very specific style and thing that they brought to the table. And so, I just always enjoyed them all. And it was great to see those all flourish.
Great. Faceless 008, do you still have any high-res versions of the soundtracks to GK2 or 3?
Unfortunately, there's some stuff I have, and but most of the stuff from that period actually wouldn't really qualify as high res. Most of it was done at 44:16, maybe at 48. It wasn't until we got to like gray matter that we started doing stuff a little more high res. So unfortunately, kind of usually what's sort of out there online. Now you can go, to places like Sierra Chest and, some of the guys like Rudy and who have done a great job of finding the best versions of this stuff. It's definitely out there to be found.
Great. When writing for the Dan Nastic is asking, when writing for the sequel album, do you envision a story arc or particular scenes that you write the music to?
What I'm trying to do actually is analyze what most of these soundtracks have included. Usually there's a certain amount of sort of highly emotional, simple love themes there, or romantic themes. There's a certain amount of adventure, sort of action-based themes. There's a certain amount of character-driven theme. There are things that definitely relate to Gabe's background or to Grace's character or to a traditional kind of villain that they might be working against. So all of that, I'm trying to look at it a little more generically and say, okay, a GK-ish kind of soundtrack would include these kinds of elements. And so I want to do that. Now, an interesting twist is, there are several people in the Kickstarter who sort of contributed at the level of getting their own personal theme. And almost all of them have said, and, feel free to use that theme as a part of the album. So it's going to be interesting to see how I can, sort of write something that's relevant to what they would kind of like to hear and have it be something that makes sense to be a part of the album.
Excellent. Okay, switching it up a little bit, Shivananda, who has asked, I think, all of our guests this same question, so I think we got to ask it to you too. Do you believe in ghosts, aliens, other worlds, and dimensions? And did you have experience of that kind yourself?
I absolutely believe in ghosts. I've had experience with ghosts, both in some of my own homes and after the passing of people I really cared about, as well as in, Jane and I, actually, when we were married, we did a 2-week honeymoon in England where the entire thing was put together by an expert on haunted castles. So we stayed every night, we stayed in a different haunted castle, and very often we were the only ones there. So we had some really interesting experiences. But yeah, I believe in that. I also believe, I think it's super arrogant to think that we're the only kind of life in this universe and beyond. So, I'm kind of open to all of that. And it's funny because you think, Jane is this amazing, creator of supernatural and dark fiction. But when we get in those scenarios, and we've had some of them that were very intense, I'm the kind of person who's like, wow, this is great, this is cool. And Jane is like, nope, not going there. I'm not going to engage. So it's really interesting, to see that.
Oh, that's great. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but is there a story you can tell? Is there something that?
Well, boy, there's some great ones. As a part of that honeymoon, we were in a castle in Wales in this middle of this huge snowstorm. We got to this castle, and this castle had a lady in gray who was a historic murderess who had been buried on the grounds. And none of the staff would talk about her when we'd ask them. They were clearly not happy about it. And we stayed at the end of this dark, long hallway in a room that was actually the Prince of Wales' room whenever he stayed there. It was this huge Gothic. And we woke up in the middle of the night, and there was this huge pounding on the door, like the whole room shook. And, you wake up like, I'm in the middle of a Twilight Zone episode. This is crazy. And we let it go on for about 10 minutes, and then Jay was like, go see. So, I went over to this huge wooden door. It's still going like this. Open the door, nothing. There's nothing there. This long candle-lit dark hallway of this castle. Close the door, go back to bed.
Oh my gosh.
And we just had several things that happened on that trip, and it was amazing.
That's great. I love it. Yeah. Helen, by the way, she clarified that she's a girl. I apologize. I just saw an I, Helin, and I don't know. So anyways, thank you. And my apologies I just never know how to deal with gender these days. YouTube Wanderer wants to know what the project was before Gabriel Knight that you and Jane worked on. What was the one that what was that one you met and started working on?
I was trying to remember the name of it. It was kind of an educational / infotainment kind of project and it was more for kids. And I'm sorry, I can't think of the title.
Okay.
But it was the kind of thing where it was like, we could both do it, but it really wasn't in our wheel, really our sweet spot. And I think it just wasn't that amazing as an idea. So luckily, I think at that point, Jane probably got Ken's ear and was like, hey, I could do something like this instead. It would be really cool.
Oh, it's nice that you started on something where you had a little bit of time to find your working relationship and all that, and use that as a ramping up.
I've got to say, I have this wonderful memory of walking down the hallway at Sierra and looking into this room, and there was a row of computers, and it was kind of a dark room, and there's this really interesting looking young woman, sort of just intently, Jane types at speeds that cannot be measured. and there's this person just going crazy and so intense. And I just sort of watched for a minute. I thought, this looks like a really interesting person. And that was, the first time I saw her, and
that's
here
great.
we are, 25 years later.
You saw this flurry of typing, and you thought, that's for me.
She looks really interesting. Yeah.
That's great. Oh boy, I'm going to mess everybody's name up. Mies Vaia wants to know what melody or track in GK2 holds the most emotional significance for you.
Boy, probably Ludwig's theme. I was really struck by Ludwig's story as we went around Munich and went to all the castles, and we went to his grave, and I just thought it was a very rich and stirring story. So when it came to writing that music, I remember I did it, I think at like 2 o'clock in the morning up in my little attic in Seattle. And I just really felt he was speaking to me. And I think the music really exhibits his personality and his life, sort of the pain that was around all that. And it holds a really strange place for me now. I know Roger is aware of this. When we were working on a simple refrain and I was mixing Ludwig, the theme, unfortunately, we had this big farm and our dogs would run around, and one of the dogs was under a lot of medication, and unfortunately she fell in the pond and drowned. Jane and I were both busy in the house. I was working in the studio. And anyway, this all happened while I was working on that theme. And of course, it was a horrific day. But I just found it really strangely ironic. Her name was Lucy. She drowned in a pond just like Ludwig drowned. There's just a weird resonance.
Yeah. So that makes. It's funny. I started playing the game for the first time. So my partner Daniel, who is he's very savvy in the world of these games. So he helped me through Phantasmagoria 2, and now we're moving on to other games. So we played like an hour and a half of it. So we'll be working our way through it. But I'm finally experiencing it for the first time, and it is really it's really quite wonderful so far. I'm really finding myself getting caught up in it. Yeah,
that's great. Well, it was really powerful to go to that part of the shoreline on that lake where he passed away and drowned.
I remember when I was
see that cross in the water.
Oh, I visited that castle when I was doing a backpacking tour when I was in college, and I remember just I don't have great memories of it, but I remember how stunning it was. That's the castle that Disney basically used to take theirs. But if I recall correctly, maybe you remember this too, but he did a lot of practical jokes apparently, and there was a big long dining table with these benches all around, and he had it rigged up that if he wanted to, he could squirt water through the bench and basically douse somebody or give them a little unintentional enema do you remember seeing anything like that?
I remember all kinds of weird stuff. There's some amazing labyrinths and stuff that he did. I mean, I think he was incredibly intelligent. I think he was probably bored out of his brain.
Yeah.
With his role and culture and there's all kinds of stuff going on.
All right. Lots of questions popping in. So a lot of people want to know what that picture is behind you right there.
This is actually a little guest room. And our daughter Raleigh, for a lot of years lived in Santa Monica with her boyfriend and now husband, and who's a surfer and actor. And they lived and spent a lot of time at the beach, and we would spend a lot of time there. So whenever they stay in this little guest room, we put that up just for them to remind them of Santa Monica.
That's great. I have another video submission that I didn't get. I wasn't able to incorporate in the first one, but since he put the time, I want to share this with you now. It's going to take me just a second to share it with you. Sir Thomas, Tawmis. Oh, let's see if I can do it right here. I think this is it. Here we go. And I have to share with you. I got to do the Zoom thing.
Can I just mention while you're doing that?
Yeah, please.
I mentioned Raleigh and her husband, Graham Hamilton. And some of you know, but, in the recent television where Luke Skywalker resurfaces as a part of the series, Graham was Luke Skywalker, and it's been a huge it's been really interesting to see the fan world of the Star Wars universe respond to him, and
Wow.
he did amazing work, and he worked with Mark Hamill. It's kind of interesting, full circle. Jane and I worked with Mark Hamill, and now he's working with Mark Hamill, so it's very cool.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Give me 2 seconds here, and I got to move things around. I want you to see it. Here's the portion of the screen, and now I'm going to do this. Oh, for goodness sakes, there we go. All right. This is our fan, Sir Thomas.
First, I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of Gabriel Knight. That game was a huge impact on me, and literally made me go to New Orleans and visit it for the first time with my wife and some of our friends because of how interested I became in New Orleans because of Gabriel Knight. Now, that said, what was it like working on Gabriel Knight?
I'm sorry, I'm not getting his
Gray
audio.
Matter and Möebius with your wife? Is it more difficult or is it easier? Because now you're working with your significant other who you play a tune, and does she say, no, I need a little more darker sounding? Or is it that you do something and then, try to get her approval on it? So I'm just curious what it is like working creatively with your significant other, if that's easier or more difficult. And if it's going to get you in trouble, feel free to lie.
Okay. So let me quickly get this back and get back to you. Sorry, the sound didn't work. So what he wanted to know is your... There we are. Here we go. He wanted to know your working relationship with Jane. So he's saying, like, when, as a husband and wife team...
Conversations with
Oh,
Curtis.
my gosh. What's happening? Hold on. Let me turn this... I don't recommend anybody being their own engineer.
It's a lot to do.
I'm so bad at this.
I feel bad for you.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is better than it's been. There's been some pretty awful ones. But we wanted to know just what's the working relationship right? Like, I mean, how do you maintain? Like, I'm sure if you have he wants to know, like, with creative differences, how do you negotiate that? But you're also a married couple, and how do you have good constructive fights when you're doing creative work together?
Yeah, it's interesting. We try to set up very clear sort of roles and compartmentalize, the professional dynamic versus our personal dynamic. We're both really passionate people. We both, really believe in our ideas, and we both have huge respect for each other. Or at least I can speak for myself. I have huge respect for Jane's talent, and I believe she also respects me as a creative. So when we're working on things together, it's kind of like, okay, here's your role, here's my role, but the ultimate sort of goal is, how do we make the work better? Are there ways that we can make this better? Are there very often, especially you get to be, in a dynamic like Jane often is in on her projects, it's really easy to get surrounded by yes people. So it's very valuable to have somebody who's going to call you on your bullshit and just say, nah, that's not great. That was that movie we watched 2 years ago. So,
And you've learned how to call her on her bullshit in a way, I would imagine, that, I mean, I'm sure it took a while, but, there are the right ways to do it and the wrong ways to do it for certain people, and so you probably,
exactly.
How to do that in a way that's respectful and not going to cause an argument, right?
Yeah, and, I tend to use humor a lot because, Jane is sensitive to my humor and enjoys it most of the time. So, I try to soften stuff that way, but she's also really good at saying to me, gee, can you make this more emotional or this needs to be bigger? And, I listen and try to be open to what needs to happen.
Yeah. Well, I can speak for all of us in saying that we can't wait to see what you all come up with next. We're very excited about sequel. I know that we talked about it, you're in the gestation period now, and you've got the funding to get started. And when do we think we can see that? That's going to be maybe, or hear that, I guess.
Yeah, I've been writing away, and I'm looking forward. I'm going to be spending most of this year focused on that, and then we're hoping that it'll be wrapping up in the early fall.
That's great.
There are also some things that Jane and I can't really talk about, but there are things that Jane and I are sort of incubating as well, which hopefully will bring our partnership back out again to some activities. So that would be cool.
We would love that, and we hope to hear about that soon, and we'll be following up. And Robert, I just want to say you've been so incredibly gracious and kind, taking not only a couple hours last week to talk to me, but taking time out of your Sunday today, and just can't tell how much I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you so much to everybody who's joined us and asked questions. And please contact me through the website if you have other questions or just want to have a dialogue. I'd love to connect with folks, and we'll go from there.
Sounds great. Well, it's a pleasure, and I will let you go. I'm down in California, so I don't know what your weather's like right now. How is it there?
It's nice today. It's not bad. Yeah.
Good. So get out in it and enjoy it while you got it. I've got some sun, so we should probably all get outside. Robert, thank you so much, and I hope to stay in touch with you and keep tabs.
That would be great, Paul.
Right.
Thanks so much.
All right. You take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, dang, that was cool. That was fun. So thanks, everyone. We're down to our last couple minutes. I have nothing else to add. Please, if you like this show, please tell people about it. Get people to join our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter and all those things. And please consider joining us on Patreon if you can, so we can have more of these conversations, which I think are really important to be chronicling these incredible artists who've done so much to provide so much entertainment and joy for you guys, and I love being in a position to talk to them, and so whatever I can do to keep helping is great. Tomorrow I'm gonna start playing Phantasm 1 with Victoria Morsel, so please join us for that. And I don't know, I never know how to end these things. Just want to say thank you to everyone, and we'll see you hopefully tomorrow and next week when I interview Bob Arnold, that jerk. All right, everyone, take care. Have a good one, and we'll see you soon. All right, bye-bye. Bye. Those are my Patreon donors because they're awesome. See you later.